episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And not only do we promise, but we deliver on our promise, as you're about to see. And today, it's a nice little change from Karen Reed land, although one of our attorneys is from that world. But we are going to be discussing Alec Baldwin in just a moment. It's been nearly 3 years after the fatal shooting of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. It all happened on the New Mexico film set of Rust. Actor Alec Baldwin is now standing trial. Jury selection took just a day, and opening statements were this morning out in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Alec Baldwin is charged with involuntary manslaughter for his role in the deadly incident that also injured the film director, who has a great name, Joel Souza. And we are in it now. It's supposed to last about 8 days or 9 days, this trial, so about another week and change to go. Let me introduce you to the best guest. If you've been following the show, you know Richard Gabriel. Since 1985, he's been a leader in the field of jury research, jury selection, and litigation communication, with experience in more than 1,500 trials in both the civil and criminal arenas. You probably heard of some of his cases: Aaron Hernandez, Casey Anthony, O.J. Simpson, Phil Spector, Enron. Kind of forgot about Enron. Kwame Kilpatrick, the disgraced Detroit mayor, Heidi Fleiss. The list goes on. Then we've got Tara Malik. What can you say about Tara? She's got a great Instagram page, by the way. Good pictures of her doggy. She's an Idaho licensed attorney practicing in state and federal court in business and commercial litigation. And she's been with us for Koberger, Vallow, and a lot of these crazy Idaho cases. And last but not least, the Brockton bomber, Joseph Krowski. He's regarded as one of the preeminent trial attorneys in Massachusetts. Yeah. He has an aggressive and persuasive approach to litigation and life, I would say. Before we get cracking on this, I lied. Joe Krowski, I think we're going to do a full show on this tomorrow. What in the world is going on in Canton now? Now it's a story that never ends. Suddenly, an alleged fourth juror has come forward saying that they were going to vote unanimously on both the first and third counts. Is this to be believed? What happens next, Joe? Give us your thoughts.
Well, I don't think much is going to happen next. The information we're getting is that 4 jurors have contacted the attorneys for Karen Reed, and they had informed the attorneys that unequivocally they were 12-0 not guilty when they were in the deliberating room, that they had reached that as, quote, an agreement. The problem for them, or for the defendant, is Massachusetts is very strict in defining what a verdict is. It's not a verdict until the verdict slip is signed, it is filed with the clerk, and it's read into the record. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of decisional authority in this state right on point. And so, because I don't think the courts want to invite ambiguity and keep relitigating deliberations with jurors. So, it's unfortunate if they were all unequivocally 12-0 not guilty. I don't know why they didn't record that and send that out on the verdict slip. But again, I don't think much will happen. But if there's anything to take from it, it kind of confirms what a lot of us have said. It's not a murder case. And if 12-0 voted not guilty on the anchor charge, the murder charge, maybe that sends a message to the district attorney that keep it with the manslaughter. Conversely, a little unnerving for Karen Reed is 8-4 people voted guilty on the motor vehicular manslaughter by OUI charge, which is really a repudiation of the conspiracy theory by a majority of the deliberating voters. So we'll see. It's a case that keeps on giving.
Yeah, well, Joe, let me ask you that. Since it was 8-4 on the involuntary manslaughter charge, the Commonwealth has said they're going to retry that case, and I promise we're getting to Alec Baldwin in a second. Does that give them the proper ammunition, if you will, to move ahead with a retrial?
Oh, I think so. I don't think either side is going to blink. We're gonna run this one back and do it all over again. The murder charge is interesting. If there's any type of evidentiary hearing and it's established that it was 12-0, not guilty, at least by agreement. But a lot of times, anecdotally, these things are really just part of bartering that goes on in the jury room. So legally, it's not very significant, but strategically, it might have some import.
Richard Gabriel, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about this. I know you haven't followed this case very closely, but in essence, it was declared a mistrial. Right. And then the defense filed a motion after the weekend saying at least one juror came forward. Two others were kind of brought to their attention through other parties. Now a fourth juror has come forward basically saying that they were unanimous on the first and third count. But as you heard Richard Gabriel say, they were actually in favor of guilt on the second count on that involuntary manslaughter. How unique or not is this to hear from jurors post-trial, post-mistrial, that they were actually unanimous on a not guilty verdict on the most serious charge?
Well, that is pretty unusual for them to be unanimous and then to say, but we're hung on all the charges and to come forward. That's pretty unique. We always take a look at post-trial interviews, and I think both sides will do this if the retrial is going to happen. Everybody learns from what they can find out from the jurors. I don't know, if there's contact available. In most jurisdictions, we always try to contact jurors unless it's expressly forbidden by the judge, to find out from jurors, what do they like, what do they not like, who are the witnesses that they favored, because that goes into the strategy for the next trial. And so I think obviously the prosecutor have to take a good hard look about whether they want to maintain the murder charge. But even that, even 8-4 is still pretty hung. And so they're going to want to take a look at, okay, what do we do to refine our approach this next time? I think Alan Jackson and his team is going to look at also this and kind of go, okay, the vehicular manslaughter, that's something we got to take a look at. If the conspiracy theory didn't work, we need to take focus on what is going to work and get the jurors to move on that particular charge.
And you heard Joe Krowski say it's a repudiation on the conspiracy theory, which was pretty convoluted. So maybe they pare that down in the event of another trial, which it looks like we're headed in that direction. Tara Malik, a very simple question by someone in the chat, but it's pertinent to every trial we cover. This one, they say, is supposed to last 9 days. Who decides, or how does the judge, I think the question was, how do they know how long a trial is going to be? Is it just based on the amount of witnesses that are going to be called? How do they figure out the calculus for this?
So that's a process that happens prior to trial. It's usually during a pretrial conference, status conference with the judge. The attorneys on each side will give the judge an idea of how long they think their case in chief will go, and the total case will go. At that point, they've got a good idea of the witnesses that each side is going to be calling. Usually that's already exchanged, the exhibits that they're going to put on. And then, from there, it's just experience. How long each witness is going to likely take. You guesstimate a little bit regarding cross-examination, redirect examination, but the judge takes that in and then allocates that time.
So this is, we've got plenty of audio and COE. I know you're going to load up some defense as well, but opening statements today in the Alec Baldwin trial. Basically, the state came out. Tara, your mic's a little overmodulated. I don't know if it's, that's what the COE was telling me. I don't know if it's an earbud issue. I never know with that, but we will fix it on the fly. Carrie Morrissey is prosecuting this case in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and basically came out swinging this morning, as prosecutors do, saying that the cardinal rule of gun safety was violated. Let's watch this clip. We have a bunch of clips here. Some might seem redundant, but they are not. So I'm going to play this. Carrie Morrissey in the Santa Fe, New Mexico court with Alec Baldwin at the defense table. Here we go.
When someone plays make-believe with a real gun in a real-life workplace, and while playing make-believe with that gun violates the cardinal rules of firearm safety, people's lives are endangered, and someone could be killed. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what this case is about. It's simple, it's straightforward. The evidence will show that someone who played make-believe with a real gun and violated the cardinal rules of firearm safety is the defendant, Alec Baldwin. You will hear over the course of the next few days that in the fall of 2021, a movie called Rust began filming at the Bonanza Creek Ranch just south of Santa Fe in Santa Fe County. You will learn that this movie was a Western with a lot of gun action. And while it was a movie set, it was a real-life workplace for many people. But you will hear this workplace was on a tight budget. And you will learn that some of the people who were hired to work at this workplace were very inexperienced. And one of those was the armorer, a very young woman named Hannah Gutierrez Reed. You will hear testimony from crew members who worked on the set, who will tell you that to them, Ms. Gutierrez's inexperience was obvious.
Well, that was good timing. I got booted out. Looks like Tara is out, but I'm back. Joe Krowski, if you can hear me, right?
I sure can.
That was in inauspicious timing. And Tara, I got booted out too. I don't know what just happened, but we're all here. Joe Krowski, you're the criminal defense attorney. Let's go around the horn. I mean, she basically came out, the prosecutor, and said, look, he was playing make-believe with a real gun. An effective opening statement, do you think, or no?
I didn't think so. I wasn't that impressed with it. I thought it was a little bit convoluted, a little bit all over the place. And I get it. Prosecutors want to develop a theme, but the constant repetition of that make-believe with a gun and a lot of things that she mentioned in that opening are going to come back to the prosecution. They went on and on at great detail about how that gun, when it was sent or delivered to the production company, was in terrific shape. What she omitted is that the prosecution team absolutely destroyed that gun, thereby preventing the defendant from having access to it and running their own tests. And again, look, if the criticism is that the person was inexperienced and Mr. Baldwin didn't follow the cardinal rules of gun safety, that really comes back on the whole state of New Mexico, because it's an open carry state that's really lax on the rules and regulations that they applied to movie production companies. And one of the specific things she said in the 3 cardinal rules, you're supposed to make sure that a gun is not loaded. However, that's the exact opposite factual scenario when you're an actor. Movie companies, SAG regulations don't want actors bearing the responsibility of trying to decipher what is a hot gun, a loaded gun, versus what's a cold gun, a gun that might just have either a dummy round or a blank round. I thought both we're focusing on the prosecution was just a little bit long, and I thought it could have been a lot more concise.
Richard, I agree with you. I also thought the defense opening was a little roundabout for a Harvard. She went to Tufts, but he's from Boston. Joe Krowski, Alex Spiro, the defense attorney, is from Boston, went to Tufts and Harvard. Lorna McKenzie here, Richard Gabriel says that Alec Baldwin, which is true, he arrived with his baby, his nanny. I don't know if that was for the reality show. I thought maybe he's trying to, let me put it nicely. Alec Baldwin at times, Richard, can be a little tempestuous. I've run into him myself as a former reporter in New York City. What does he have to do? Someone tweeted out a photo where he looked just so annoyed to be sitting there. Is he towing a very thin line with the attitude that he projects right now with these jurors watching him closely?
Yeah, I mean, jurors always look at a criminal defendant and they're kind of bouncing whatever the evidence is and looking over at the defendant and kind of saying, well, okay, does he look like somebody who would have done this? And so there is always that thing there. Whenever I work with criminal defendants, my goal is always to make them disappear, because the focus mainly is on saying that the prosecution hasn't met their burden of proof. When I was working with Heidi Fleiss and O.J. Simpson and all these defendants, my goal is not to keep them as the center of attention. As you heard in the prosecution's opening statement, she's focused on sort of the rules. Here's Alec Baldwin. He knows what these rules are. She's trying to make a negligent, this is the manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, which means he has to be criminally negligent. It's kind of a delicate balance for jurors, because that negligence is really a civil standard that most people are used to here. And so what they're trying to do, and I understand the themes that the prosecutors are trying to do, they're trying to say he violated the rules here. It is a little bit more easier for the defense to come back and go, those aren't the rules. Those aren't actually the rules there. The other thing I found is going to be really hard for the prosecution that they just failed to do, which the defense really kind of focused in on, is nobody knew there was a live round in here. So how can you be actually negligent? How can you be reckless if you have no idea what you're dealing with here? So I think there's, both sides are kind of playing at this thing. I think the prosecution is trying to set up this standard of just sort of this reckless behavior as a general rule, and hoping the jury's going to latch onto that for the criminal negligence. And I think the defense is obviously going to hone in on, even if he somehow is impeached a little bit on his statements about he never pulled the trigger and things like that, that they're going to focus in on, it doesn't really matter because nobody knows there's actually a live round in this particular gun. On the demeanor issue, yes, I mean, he needs to tone it down, because again, he doesn't want to look agitated, because that can reinforce the impression somehow that he is a little bit of a loose cannon, and somehow might be not as careful as he could have been on the set.
Yeah, and Richard, I know your time is limited today, so I'm going to double up on a question. Actually, Rosemary Romero is, and I'm going to tweak it a little, but by the defense using Alec Baldwin footage from the Rust set, would that help or hurt Alec Baldwin? Because he's a celebrity. He's not just any celebrity. I mean, he's a big-time A-list celebrity for 40 years. What kind of impact does this have on jurors who may have seen him in Hunt for Red October or many other movies?
Well, whenever I've dealt with cases with celebrities or people, prominent sports figures or things like that, what we're always trying to find out is what is the juror. Sometimes jurors actually create a higher standard for somebody they view in the public eye. They actually might think, well, this is a person who has a greater responsibility because they are a role model. They are somebody who people look up to. So that's always a challenge, I think, on the defense side. On the other hand, jurors do, one of the things I'm always trying to look at is sort of, does a juror want to convict a defendant? What are the reasons they either want to, are looking for reasons to do it? And while some people might go, I don't like his acting, or I don't like the characters that he's portraying, that's, I think, one of the decisions that both sides had to make in jury selection, is to kind of go, do jurors, are they a little bit starstruck? Do they watch television a lot? Do they kind of get enamored by celebrities? That's the kind of decision making that you want to do, because if they are, then sometimes that can favor the defense in a case like this, because jurors want to see evidence in the light most favorable to somebody they may look up to.
Interesting. Interesting psychology. ND317 says he looks bored. Tara Malik, someone earlier in the chat, by the way, so first comment I see is, hey, Joel, you're being lazy. You're not streaming this. We just streamed Karen Reed for 9+ weeks, and it was a stressful trial. But I'm going to tell you, in 2024, we're going live 2 trials. The first one's going to be Donna Adelson in September, and I'm definitely heading over to see, with Steve Cohen, who doesn't know this yet, the Sarah Boone trial, the so-called suitcase trial, in October. And look at this, Karen Reed and Daybell at the same time. So whoever that was, relax. We're going to be live covering some trials, doing some interesting things in this not so new year. Tara, one of the other comments, though, that was much more civil, was about being a civil lawsuit instead of a criminal case here. Is this a stretch? Is this prosecutorial overreach, as they say? I mean, he claims he didn't pull the trigger, but someone died at his hands because he used a weapon, firearm. I think everyone agrees it was a horrible accident. Should this be settled in a civil courtroom, not a criminal courtroom? What do you think?
I think that the prosecution is going to have a really tough time in this case. This is going to be a tricky case to prove up in light of a couple of different factors. Number one, it has to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Number two, you already have two people who are also involved in this case that were already either pleaded guilty or found guilty. And so they're on the hook. That's not great for a prosecution, because a jury will sometimes look at that and go, well, there's already someone who was found responsible here. And I think, it goes back to Richard's point about, do they want to find this defendant guilty? So I think that's another difficulty that they're going to face. That there is some evidence that's not great for the defense. Alec Baldwin gave an interview where he was talking about he didn't pull the trigger at all. Prosecution is saying that the evidence is going to show that, there's people and witnesses who can say that his finger was on the trigger. Alec's theory of the case is that the gun went off, that there was some sort of malfunction. Now, we don't have the gun. The defense didn't have the opportunity to test it. That's a little bit muddy there. But as far as the prosecution's case, they really have an uphill battle, I think, to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt and convince these jurors of his guilt.
And Richard, this is kind of the $64,000 question, and this is where the defense and the state were split. And the question again from Rosemary Romero: should he have treated the gun as a loaded weapon, or is he supposed to treat a real gun on a set as a prop? And even in the opening statements, the prosecutor said a prop gun does not mean it's not a real gun, because she said you're going to continue to hear the term prop gun over and over. My question to you is, New Mexico's out west. I worked in Arizona. People use firearms out there for hunting. It's, land of the Second Amendment out there. What kind of effect or impact in terms of the jury's relationship to this case and what happened will there be here? I mean, are they going to be tougher on Alec Baldwin because he didn't follow kind of typical gun safety protocol, or are they going to excuse him because he's an actor?
There's two interesting issues that you just talked about. One has to do with in jury selection, both sides actually spend some real time talking to the jurors about gun ownership, because that's a critical jury selection issue in terms of looking at profile here. I think there are some gun owners who say, I don't care. They keep their guns in lock boxes. They keep their ammunition separately. They are fastidious and careful in terms of how they care for, and they treat every firearm as if it is, a potentially dangerous thing, whether it's loaded or not. That's obviously what the prosecution is looking for. People who are that kind of meticulous about it. Doesn't matter. It can always be loaded. It can always go off. It's a really dangerous thing. I think the defense obviously was looking for people to say, look, I am careful with the firearms, but, sometimes things do happen and there's only so many precautions you can take. The second issue that you've touched on here, this discussion about whether it should have been treated as a loaded weapon here. It is a loaded prop weapon. I mean, of course, he is supposed to be a character who has a gun with blanks in it. So the assumption, of course, is that it is, to a certain extent, a loaded prop weapon. I think going back to my point is it, should this, and this is, I think, an interesting point from the prosecution standpoint, should there always be the assumption that a live round could be in a gun, no matter how many sets you've been on, no matter how many prop guns you've handled, you should always make the assumption, oh my God, I should check for a live round in this gun. I think they're trying to set that up as one of the concepts here.
Yeah, Joe Krowski, I'm curious. I mean, I went to school in Boston. People in Boston can get a little wild, but it's a different gun culture in the Northeast, where I'm from and you're from, than it is in New Mexico. What do you think the impact's going to be with these jurors here on the other side of the country?
So look, I represent a lot of people accused of firearms related offenses, and I always try to stay away from jurors that either belong to the NRA or are avid gun owners, because I just find them to be very, very judgmental on people that either illegally possess a firearm or possess a firearm legally but don't know how to use it. So that's definitely in play. And this is dangerous territory for Alec Baldwin. I've never been to New Mexico, but I just can't imagine they like people like me or Alec from, the left coast or the right coast, Boston, LA. He's just a big, loud liberal. So he should, if I was his attorney, I would pull him aside tonight and tell him to, treat this with the formality and decorum it deserves. Don't look disinterested, because I just can't believe there's a huge fan club for Alec Baldwin down there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And Richard, to that point, we saw this in the Charlie Adelson trial, Richard, where I'm acquaintances with him now because of this. But Daniel Rashbaum, who was Charlie Adelson's defense attorney and will be Donna Adelson's defense attorney, he went up to Tallahassee. The old saying in Florida, the further north you go, the more southern it gets. And here you had this Miami-based attorney up in Tallahassee who was a little bit of a fish out of water. So I'm also wondering, not only is Alec Baldwin, but then you've got his high-powered defense team. The guy is a Bostonian. He went, as I said, to Tufts and Harvard. I'm sure the guy's a brilliant mind. He didn't impress me that much on his feet today. But what about that factor where jurors are looking? Now you're looking at an A-list celebrity, and you're looking at a good-looking, slick defense attorney in a nice fitted blue suit with the shiny brown shoes, his Gucci, I don't know if it's Gucci, but his fancy belt buckle. How are they going to perceive the attorney there in New Mexico?
Well, you always want to pay attention to where you are. I mean, I've done cases all around the country here, and you always want to be respectful of the venue and the community that you're in. You want to know the culture. You want to know the community and have an understanding of this. Even though, for the most part, New Mexico can be pretty conservative in areas, Santa Fe is a relatively liberal area. It's got a pretty thriving arts community and stuff like that. So they may not be quite as intolerant of Alec Baldwin. However, you always want to be respectful. I mean, I think it's very difficult for out-of-town attorneys to always kind of come up against who is the hometown person that knows and, is more familiar with the jury pool there. So it's not necessarily how you dress and whether you're slick or not, but it's how respectful you are of the audience that you're dealing with, how much you are saying, I want to help you, the jury, better understand my case. I'm not going to, talk over your heads or somehow think I'm better than you just because I'm from the East Coast and stuff. So it's really jurors spend time sort of discerning what's the overall attitude of the case. It applies to Alec Baldwin. It applies to his attorneys. That's what they have to do, is they have to be respectful and honor the jury and say, we're here to help you make a good decision.
Tara Malik, Nikki Cud's friend of the show. She was in our New York book signing. By the way, we're in Chicago next week, the 16th at the Bookseller, and the COE will put something up for Thursday. We're at a synagogue in Glencoe, Illinois. But Nikki Cud's here. Does the panel think that Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who's now serving time, she is the armorer, will she have to take the stand? What's your best guess about this? And let me add Alec Baldwin to the mix. Obviously an amazing actor. Can you get up there and do a good acting job, Tara?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I would put Alec Baldwin on the stand. I think that from what I've seen of him before, he can be extremely volatile. I was concerned about the way that he was presenting himself in court today. I think, the question you asked earlier about, how he was behaving was a really good one. A jury is going to be watching that defendant like a hawk. And there is a very fine line between, what he's doing here, which is like this kind of nonchalant attitude. I'm not worried about this, kind of leaning back in his chair. Someone had tweeted out a picture that, with a caption that said he was falling asleep in his own trial. And then the reverse, which is getting so agitated and then drawing the jury's attention in a different way, a negative way. So, just based on that alone, I think he would be a difficult person to try and control on the stand. If I was his attorney, who knows what his defense attorney is going to do here, especially on cross-examination when you have far less control. As far as Hannah Reid, I know that there was a pretrial motion. I don't know how that ended up. Maybe the other panelists do, about whether or not she was going to be forced to testify in this trial.
By the way, Joe Krowski, no one was impressed. I figured out that there's a Reid in this trial, and there's also a Morrissey in this trial. So we've got 6 degrees or 2 degrees of separation. I know no one will be happier to hear this than Joe Krowski, the Brockton bomber. The reality show with Alec Baldwin, the Daily Mirror, breaking some news just a few moments ago that it is still a go, that TLC was in negotiations with Alec Baldwin. Even if he gets sentenced to prison for 18 months stint or jail, he'll be able to work on his reality show. So you'll be able to see all 7 of his children from ages 1 to 10 and the wife in a reality show. Makes me a little worried for America, but what can I tell you? Leo Wren here, to Joe, back to you on this. I understand the judge did not allow the prosecution to mention Alec Baldwin was a producer as well as an actor. I don't understand why. He had responsibilities as a producer. This was a big win for the defense in pretrial motions yesterday. Why not bringing in the fact that he was a producer on the show?
Oh, I just think because then it's just too attenuated, the responsibility as a producer. He was indicted. The case was presented to a grand jury on very specific information, and that's essentially him mishandling a firearm. As a producer, his role was to employ staff, and he employed staff. I mean, the woman that he hired, Miss Reid, had worked as an armorer before. He didn't have a prop master. He had an actual armorer. Again, I think it would have just been too wide and obtuse and allowed the prosecution just too many attenuated theories to try to hook him. So I thought it was a terrific decision, and I think it was sound and consistent with the law.
And Richard, you get this question not because you're a jury consultant, you live in Hollywood, you live in LA. Can Richard, can you answer? I mean, this is the $1 million question. Why in this day and age is there any reason to have a real weapon on the set? I mean, was this just a complete oversight by the armor, by the kind of, for lack of a better term, the chain of command here that just simply somehow let a live bullet slip into this chamber?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to have any live rounds anywhere close to a set. I mean, that's the real key here. Why they have an actual weapon here? There are some, reasons, because there is, in the scene that they're shooting, a weapon has to fire. Now, there, I guess, could be some CGI or something like that you could put in to replicate that, and maybe these days they may actually be able to produce a gun which somehow can't fire a live round, but they do use live weapons. But that's why there's so much care by an armorer in terms of taking a look at actually what they're loading, what are the dummy rounds, and how do they use those. So that's really why that is used. It is frequently used on a set, but there's no reason whatsoever to have a live round on a set. Regarding the judge's ruling on this producer thing, the judge was confused. He said, wait a minute, if we allow evidence also of him as a producer, somehow he's negligent in allowing himself to somehow have this weapon. And they said that doesn't really make sense, that somehow he'd be responsible as a producer for himself having a weapon in things. So I think that's one of the problems also the judge was having with this allowing. It is, as Joe said, it's really 2 separate roles here. And the producer role, his role as a producer really didn't have anything to do with safety on set. That's what really one of the reasons why the first AD actually pled no contest to the.
Yeah, that is true. And by the way, one of my oldest childhood friends is Eva Hoffman, and Eva Hoffman's brother Sam Hoffman is a very well-established Hollywood director, even though he lives in Manhattan. And I reached out to him, and he's willing to come on the show and talk to us about the protocol. Dave Halls was the first AD for many years. Sam was the first AD. Sam moved up to director. He's directing the show Evil on Netflix right now. But we'll get him on, and he'll tell us how things are supposed to work on a set. Meanwhile, how's Carm doing from Linda Liu? I'm glad you asked. Carm doesn't know this yet, but also part of the 2024 game plan is we're going to build out Patreon, and Carm's going to be a vital part of that. She's been a little lax, not coming on as many shows as she should. She's going to be on a show. We're doing a special show Sunday night about Dan Markel. She'll be on that one, and you'll be able to access her. Look, she says, I'm okay. She's getting ready to go visit Chicago. You'll get access to Carm on Patreon. Dear Abby is now Dear Carm. We're going to develop that. It was a COE's idea. And as I said, she doesn't really know this yet, but she's finding it out live on Surviving the Survivor. I think we have a clip here of the defense. I'm looking at the still shot, which is making me laugh because it's just, you can't see it, but Alec Baldwin with his arms crossed looking really annoyed. But let's watch this. This should be Alex Spiro, criminal defense attorney for representing Alec Baldwin.
This was an unspeakable tragedy, but Alec Baldwin committed no crime. He was an actor acting, playing the role of Harlan Rust. An actor playing a character can act in ways that are lethal, that just aren't lethal on a movie set. These cardinal rules, they're not cardinal rules on a movie set. And I don't have to tell you much more about this because you've all seen gunfights in movies. And the reason that can happen is because safety is ensured before the actor. On this movie
He looks so likable right there. Sorry, I just had to stop. Look.
set, there were people responsible for ensuring the safety of the set and the firearm. Those people failed in their duties, but Alec Baldwin committed no crime. The most critical issue in this case is how a real bullet got on a movie set. The evidence will show that real bullets are never supposed to be on movie sets. Movie sets use dummies and blanks. Movie sets use dummies, fake inert bullets that look like real bullets, they don't go bang, for when you want a close-up of the gun. You can't tell them apart from live bullets by looking at them, which is why live bullets can be nowhere near a movie set. And if the director wants a shot of the gun going, bang, poof, there's blanks.
I'm going to stop it right there for a sec just to get Tara's. I got a couple of questions. He keeps using like the phrase bang, poof. Are these deliberate expressions as he's going through opening statements to kind of minimize the powerfulness of a weapon? I thought this was interesting. Maybe I'm reading too far into it. And anything you'd like to add up to this point, Tara?
Sure. I'm not exactly certain why he would want to use bang and poof. It could be because he's trying to minimize this and make it, seem like this is a movie set. This is what happens, that this is normal. But, I wasn't super impressed with his opening statement, to be quite honest. I thought it could have been a lot tighter. I was a little bit disappointed that he was reading from notes the whole time. It didn't come off well. And especially in light of the prosecution getting up there and delivering I agree, it was a little bit meandering opening statement, but from memory and making eye contact with this jury and using her body language as she's speaking versus standing behind the podium as the defense attorney is doing here and reading off of a piece of paper. It doesn't look polished. And I think, when you're giving any sort of statement in front of a jury, opening or closing, or even presenting your evidence through a witness, you want to be projecting confidence in your case, that it the best that out of anyone in this room. You're the expert of your case. And I didn't really get that feeling from this particular opening statement.
Tara, I'm with you. I feel like you come in there with a lot more moxie, as with Joe Krowski. Joe, let me play this out for you and get your take.
Sure.
He also defended Alex Hernandez. So Aaron Hernandez, I'm sorry. So he's had some big cases. I don't know. He seemed a little off his footing here.
That they can use. And those blanks look nothing like real bullets. And they are used for those shooting scenes. And, they'll play these videos that they described of Alex, firearm in the movie going bang, poof. And people are conditioned to seeing people firing weapons and thinking that's a dangerous act. That's a dangerous act. And they will play those videos and give you that image to try to tarnish him in your eyes. But that's not what happened here. On this set, there was a real bullet, something that should never be on a movie set, something which has nothing to do with making a movie. And you will hear no evidence, not one word, that Alec Baldwin had anything to do with that real bullet being brought onto that set.
You heard it there. He had nothing to do with that bullet being brought onto that set. Joe, just from a performative aspect, number one, I feel like you'd crush this guy in a courtroom. I feel like you come in with a lot more energy and focus. What do you think of him from a performative aspect, but also contextually what he was saying? The last point he makes is a good one.
Yeah, I agree with Tara. First of all, it's your opportunity to introduce yourself, your client, and your case to the jury. Whether it's an opening statement or a closing argument, I always walk close to the jury and I give my argument from memory. And of course, I ad lib during it as you start to find your rhythm. The other criticism I had is he kind of weaved too much argument. An opening statement is a statement. It's what you believe the evidence is going to show. And you don't need to keep repeating the evidence will show, the evidence will show. Just tell that story. That way, at the end, the summation, you then incorporate the facts as found into the closing argument. And that's what got him in a little trouble. You saw his opening was objected to, and probably appropriately so, and it kind of interrupted his rhythm. So, definitely he's a smart guy. He's intelligent, but he had some really good points in there that got lost by the fact that, one, he was reading, kept looking down at the binder, and two, couldn't really tell if it was an opening statement or a closing argument. I do love the point, though, that he talks about the cardinal rule does not apply on a movie set. And one of the cardinal rules, again, is, right, you always assume that the gun's loaded. Well, if that was the case, you'd never be able to shoot the gun during a movie. It's the exact opposite. An actor assumes that it's not loaded with a live round, and he assumes that the armorer has made sure that it's safe. And they went on and on about the prosecution, just to go back for a second, that the armorer, Miss Reed, was inexperienced. How experienced do you have to be when your primary job is make sure a live round doesn't come within 20 miles of that set, and look at the gun and make sure that it's not a live round in the gun and that it's made safe before you hand it off to the actor?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you on that one. There are these little nuances that come up in a trial. Richard's going to have to jump in a minute or two, but one of the things I noticed, Richard, and I find this stuff fascinating, is that the prosecutor was referring to him as Alexander, either Alexander or the defendant. We know that prosecutors love the word defendant because it kind of dehumanizes them. But what about the Alexander part of this, calling him by his full name? What is that supposed to put out to the jury?
Well, I think they're trying to kind of divorce him from celebrity of his name, Alec Baldwin. I mean, everybody knows him as Alec Baldwin. So by calling him Alexander, it formalizes him. It sort of divorces him from the actor that everybody knows as Alec. And it's a formalization, I think, of this. I just think it's an affectation. And look, both Joe and Tara are going to say, you always make these little sort of judgment, strategic calls as you're going in to kind of go, okay, how do I want to characterize this? How do I want to characterize the defendant? How do I want to characterize the evidence and things? And this is just one of those little nuances that they probably said, yeah, I'm going to call him Alexander, just to kind of tweak that everybody knows him as Alec.
Yeah, I had a friend, Michael Wexler, who's still a friend. And when we played high school tennis, he was that guy that would tap the tennis racket on the cement while you were trying to serve. And it wasn't me, but it was my friend John Hume who would eventually chase him around trying to kill him on the tennis court. And I feel like the Alexander is just goading him into a fit that he might have during the course of this trial. Richard, before we let you go,
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, Joe, please.
Sorry to interrupt. Not just that, but that's kind of tapping into what I said earlier, right? That fear, that cultural elitism. This is Alexander from New York City, Alexander from Los Angeles. So that's kind of what I took from that. Kind of a little dirty trick.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about that as well. Speaking of Alexander, Richard, before we let you go, do you think he takes a stand? I mean, you've had so many high-profile defendants that you've worked with. Will we hear him?
I doubt it seriously. And there's for two reasons. Yes, there's the whole volatility factor in terms of can he really contain himself in a cross-examination. There's really the issue is necessity. Is there any need for him to take the stand? The problem has to do, there's twofold with him taking the stand. One is he could be impeached on this concept that he said he never pulled the trigger there. And there's been no evidence whatsoever that this gun was misfiring from the FBI who examined it. And so the difficulty is that he could be impeached. And as a result of that, then they can make the argument, closing argument. If he's impeached on one thing, then you can dismiss his entire testimony. So that's a particular problem. The other sort of more tonal or atmospheric issue is whether the jury thinks he's acting or how authentic and sincere he actually is in his testimony. Am I getting Alec Baldwin, the actor? Am I getting actually a person who is truly just horrified that the gun went off and killed this woman that was on his set? And that's one of the, I think one of the problems is that the jury is going to have to grapple with that. So I can't imagine why he would testify, but you never say never in these cases.
That's a great point. It's amazing for as good as an actor as he is. Number one, he was having those lion type yawns today, but he was also looking incredibly smug. Last thing, Richard, I promise, the ABC interview he did with George Stephanopoulos, big mistake.
Well, I'm gonna have you ask Joe and Tara about this, but Joe and Tara would be probably body tackling Alec Baldwin and saying, no, you cannot go and do these interviews. It's every defense lawyer's nightmare to have a client go on and start talking about the case. I don't care how good they are. There may be some exceptions in times where we've said, okay, we may need to have a statement here and there, but it's so fraught with it, as we've seen with this I never pulled the trigger issue, that it really limits your possibilities. If he hadn't gone on and done some of these interviews, there is the possibility that they said, look, we may have to put you on to address an issue or stuff. But with these interviews and with statements that are being made, there's always this inevitability that you can nitpick and do it. So the better part of caution is just to say, just don't do anything ahead of time and save it for the trial.
Richard, I love having you on. He always brings us amazing insight. Richard is literally one of the guys that started jury consulting, the preeminent figure in this country in that profession. Richard, thank you for being with us.
Appreciate it, Joel. Great to meet you, Tara and Joe, and
Thanks.
look forward to the next time.
Yeah, we'll see you soon. Love having Richard on, but I also feel like I have to behave. Feel like he's almost like the principal figure. So now we can let loose a little. By the way, Phil and Scott are back this Friday. It's been 2 weeks with no Phil and Scott. We're coming back. Here is the prosecutor talking about how you have to treat every firearm like it is a matter of life and death.
You will learn that these movie set safety rules require actors, like the defendant, to treat every firearm as though it's loaded, to never point a firearm at another person, and to never put your finger on the trigger unless you're prepared to shoot or to destroy whatever's in front of you. The evidence will show that on October 21st, 2021, after that lunch break, the defendant once again violated those set safety rules. And during this blocking, The director had instructed him to just slowly take out that gun and just hold it at an angle. But you will see that the defendant takes it out quickly the first time, points it. And you will hear witness testimony who will tell you the first time he does it, his finger is on or around the trigger. He does it again, takes it out very fast, points it. And once again, you will hear testimony that his finger was on or around the trigger. And the evidence will show that that third and fatal time, he takes it out once again, fast, hammer's cocked, he cocks the hammer, points it straight at Miss Hutchins, and fires that gun.
Tara, just curious, your take. Also, just your take, her as a prosecutor. She's got kind of a weird delivery, but both, again, contextually, the content and the way she delivers what she's saying.
You have to be really careful in your opening statements when you are making representations about what you believe the evidence is going to show, because the jury is going to hold you to that, and so is the defense attorney. And I think one of the things that she's trying to do in this opening statement is establish kind of a standard for the movie set. And, you have to treat every gun like it's loaded. And, he violated that standard by whipping it out and pointing it at people multiple times. And I think the defense attorney actually did a nice job and brought this point out in the middle of his argument, which was, no one was concerned. No one stopped him. And in fact, they asked him to do it more than once. To take the gun out. So, that's what I mean when you have to be careful about what you say in your opening statement. I don't think that it's as clear as the prosecutor is explaining. From what I've seen so far, I think that's going to be a real issue for them. And it doesn't address the fact that this was a live round on a movie set that shouldn't have been there to begin with. So she's not really taking that on at all. As far as their presentation goes, I think her affect, everyone has a different style when they come in. I do think that it was a much more powerful opening argument for her because as it relates to, or in comparison to the defense attorney, because she's looking straight at this jury. She's establishing credibility. She's establishing authority over this courtroom and the case, her case. So those are some of my impressions on it.
By the way, my impression is Stephen Baldwin. He was in the courtroom. I don't mean to be mean, but he's starting to look like an old woman, which is weird because he and I are about the same age. So don't mean to be mean. Just a simple observation there. The prosecutor went on to say that Baldwin used the gun many, many times. It worked fine. He never did a safety check. He actually did not want to offend the armorer, Joe Krowski. And this kind of stuck with me. She said he used the gun as a pointer. Your thoughts on that? And then I got a follow-up question for you.
So look, it still doesn't get them where they need to be, though. Certainly, Alec Baldwin in a conventional setting was not exercising proper gun safety, but there's a logical disconnect with the government's theory of the case. This was the land of make-believe. This is a land where you would never expect there to be a live round in the gun. And to the extent that he was mishandling the gun, that's why you have an armorer. And the state of New Mexico had at the time no regulations in place demanding that anyone handling a gun on a movie set be certified under the NRA or any applicable safety course. So look, there are some points, and a jury might find that he didn't handle the gun in the way you would expect one to in a conventional setting. But there's still a break in causation with there being a live round in that Colt 45.
We're going to go a few more minutes. Joe, the other question I wanted to ask you, I don't think, the Karen Reed trial had so many twists and turns, 9 weeks of that. Here, I don't think there are going to be many surprises. So I guess the bottom line question, do you think these jurors already know which way they're deciding in the deliberation room?
Oh, that's really tough to answer. It depends on what kind of jurors they are. But if you look at what the commentary is in the general public, I think most people agree that it's a terrible, tragic accident. Maybe Alec Baldwin's not the most likable figure, but to criminalize what took place and to have him exposed to 18 months of prison time, I think there's a pretty healthy consensus, and I'm sure that the jury's a microcosm of the public, that this is a reach to criminalize what he did on that day.
Yeah. Tara, obviously one of the big points that the defense and the state, the New Mexico, are fighting about here is Alec Baldwin in his ABC interview with George Stephanopoulos. He said, "I never pulled the trigger. I just basically cocked the gun. I pulled the hammer back." And in the openings today, she makes it very clear, the prosecutor, that the third time he pulls the trigger with a live round, and then she went into details about how it went through Halyna Hutchins' right lung and perforated her spine, and then it also hit the director in his shoulder, that same bullet. So you just see the devastation, obviously, that a gun can cause. But what about this notion of pulling the trigger versus not pulling the trigger? Alec Baldwin's the only one who really knows the answer. How are the jurors going to settle on this? They're going to have to pick a side, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, they're the fact finders. So if the evidence is in dispute, if there's conflict or contradiction in that evidence, they're going to have to first decide what happened and pick. And then from there, apply the facts that they find to the law, the jury instructions that are given by the judge at the end of the case. One of the things that does, the worst, I think one of the worst pieces of evidence against Alec Baldwin is the report, the ballistics report on this gun, that it wasn't malfunctioning, that this is not likely that it just went off after the hammer was cocked back. And him saying that he never put his finger on the trigger at all, when you have perhaps witnessed statements and then this ballistics report as well, it really doesn't help his credibility. And so I think that's one of the reasons. I think both Joe and Richard have said it. It's, maybe it was Richard who was talking about whether or not he takes the stand. Credibility is a big issue in these cases. And so, that is going to be a significant problem for them. And putting him on the stand is not going to be helpful. But it's still, again, this still doesn't get around that. Why was there a live round in this firearm? How did it get there? And why was it there? So.
Yeah, it's so crazy. I mean, I got to say, in fairness to Alec Baldwin, I did act in a high school play. And if someone handed me a prop gun back in 1987, I would have just fired it because I would have thought it would have been safe to do. But it's a big difference between I forget what it was. It was the Scopes trial, but there's I forget. I have to look it up. My mind, whatever. I wasn't the star. I was a peripheral player. But anyway, I digress, and now I'm completely lost in 1987. Joe Krowski, did you have really long hair back in 87? I feel like you would have.
87, I was still in high school.
I feel like you could have had a mullet back then.
Yeah, no, the mullet was like 89, 90. I think I probably had a buzz cut, a lot more than I have here. My wife hates this haircut. I actually do have hair on the top of my head, but
I like your hair. She hates your haircut.
Short.
Well, hold on. She hates your current haircut?
Yes, she does.
Why?
Too short. Can't stand it.
I think you look handsome. Did she ever want you to did she ever want you to shave completely the head? Just done? No. And you never considered that?
I have.
You have. All right, we'll talk about this. We'll discuss this off air. I've got some thoughts for you.
Sure. Just one point on the gun.
Yeah, please.
I know in Massachusetts we would get a spoliation instruction to the jury. So, the ambiguities about the gun in the way whether or not that gun was operating properly, but for the Commonwealth malfeasance, the defendant would have been able to present or potentially present evidence that it wasn't working properly. In guns even manufactured properly, I've done too many firearms cases to count. Even though there's certain specs on these guns, when you have your own ballistics expert examine them, sometimes the trigger pull has changed. They've defined some of these guns, and that means that you can brush the gun and it can go off. Right in the manual, the defense attorney made a good point. There is anecdotal evidence that some of these Colt 45s, when the hammer is cocked, that they have dropped on the ground and gone off, and that didn't involve a trigger pull. I just can't believe that they thought it was a good idea to hit it with a mallet once, see the damage it did, hit it with a mallet 2 more times, to the point where they destroyed the most critical piece of evidence in the case. It is absolutely breathtaking. If I was a judge, I would have thrown the case out on that, because that is destruction of potentially exculpatory evidence. Shame on them.
Yeah, that's an amazing point. Really good point. Kevin Fixler, for those who do not know, he would never have a shaved head. He's got a nice thick head of hair and a thick beard. He is not a one, but a 2-time Idaho Reporter of the Year, works for the Idaho Statesman. He's been on our show many times regarding Brian Koberger and Fix, Steve Cohen, Tim Jansen, myself. We are coming out for that trial. I've told STS this is the year where we go out to trials and we get the scoop, old-fashioned reporting way, on the ground, that you could never get here in global headquarters in Miami Beach. And of course, we are going to have Tara Malik come make an appearance. If I'm going all the way to Idaho, she better show up. Yeah, so
I will be there.
The Fix is heavily sought after in STS singles. But enough about Fix. So let me get him out of here. Here's another defense soundbite. We'll break it down, and then we'll start to wrap her up.
Of the armorer placing a live bullet into that firearm. You know, you hear the prosecutor say, you know, he did this, or he performed in a certain way. He picked out the biggest gun as his prop. It's to tarnish him in your eyes. You will hear no evidence whatsoever. No evidence that anything Mr. Baldwin did, that something he did in that moment, that horrible moment when she put that bullet in that gun, none of it had anything to do with Alec Baldwin. And finally, the first assistant director's job, the head of safety, Dave Halls, checks it before it goes to the actor. And he will tell you he made a tragic mistake. He failed to detect a live bullet. And Alec Baldwin had nothing to do with that either. So all this evidence that the prosecutor just outlined, all of it, has nothing to do with these critical issues. Nothing. Which leads us to this. The evidence will show that on a movie set, safety has to occur before the gun is placed in the actor's hands. In this case, this unique case on a movie set, the prop gun was placed in Mr. Baldwin's hands and cold gun was announced, meaning it had been checked and double-checked by those responsible to ensure the gun was safe. It was just a prop. They all thought it was just a prop and could do no harm. The actor's job is to act, to rehearse, to choreograph his moves, to memorize his lines. He's Harlan Rust.
I love that. I didn't know that the character's name was actually Rust, Harlan Rust. Tara, I mean, he ends that there with he's Harlan Rust. An actor's job is to act. He makes good points. What do you think?
Yeah, I think he does too. I think those are great points. It's not his responsibility. That's why you have a series of people who are handling the props before it gets to the actor. You know, the other issue that he brought up was Dave Halls, who was one of the other individuals who was charged as it relates to this matter. And Halls ended up pleading guilty to a misdemeanor. And so, you know, this is really helpful, I think, to the defense. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is someone has already been held responsible here, 2 people, in fact. And
Right.
so it's a good piece of information for the defense. It's not great for the prosecution, especially in a case like this, where, you know, I think they're really going to struggle to tie up these ends and show this causation that they need to prove.
Alex, the defense attorney here, also Spiro, said that you know, it's just interesting the language these defense attorneys use along the lines of an actor must act. He added a stuntman must leap, the snake must hiss. I love the way they come up with these lines. Joe Krowski, let me ask you much more of a psychological question, not a legal question. If I was in Alec Baldwin's shoes, I just know myself. I value life greatly. I would have a real hard time with myself if I killed someone, even accidentally. Few months back, some nutty woman just ran out in front of my car with my 3 kids. I was driving, and it could have ended very badly. What do you think the psychological? He doesn't seem, I don't. I shouldn't say that. He seems remorseful in his interviews. I'm sure it's bothering him, but what do you think the psychological effect is on him for having literally killed this woman, albeit by accident?
Look, no one can really know, right? And that's just rank speculation. But I'm sure I've heard him talk. I've heard him speak about it, and different people show things differently. Again, I would think it's not evidence, but they're going to be looking at him, and he's a good actor. He should act. And if it's genuine, show it. If it's not, if you don't feel it, you still got to show it, because I think they're going to want to look at him and sense that he does feel awful about what happened. And look, to question otherwise is, I think, absurd. I think obviously he feels the enormity of this, and this is tragic to him. One quick point on that closing. I thought that was the defense attorney's best part of the closing. Some of the lines, again, I liked so much, I would have saved for the argument, for the closing argument, because now they'll be redundant. But I thought that was a really strong point of his.
What would what would you have saved, just off the top of your head?
Oh, actors act, stuntmen, lead, snakes hiss, and all of that. A lot of the argument, I would have weaved that into my closing argument.
Joe, how much time do you take on a big trial to craft your openings and closings? How much time do you take on that?
A lot longer for the closing, because then you're dealing with 1, 2, 3 weeks of witness testimony, and you want to make sure that anything that was helpful to your client, including exculpatory evidence, was in there. Anything from the experts that's helpful, you want to put it in there. Any of the impeachment, inconsistent statements of the government's witnesses, you really want to put in there, especially if it's of primary parts of the trial. And anything that's bad in there, you want to deal with. So, the closing's usually the day after, the trial ends. So you probably put a good 12 to 4. It's a sleepless night. Opening's a little different. You've kind of been dealing with the case for a year, 2 years, and you kind of know what the evidence is going to show. But closing argument, you put a ton of time. It's a sleepless night. With me, I don't read it. I just pace it out for about 6 or 8 hours, and then I go in there. I just walk over to the jury and I give it to them. But hey, look, this lawyer I heard is $2,000 an hour. Yeah. Alan Jackson's what, $1,000 or $2,000 an hour, and both of them read from binders. Maybe I should just start doing that.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. 2,000 billable hour. I guess that's what Harvard Law gets you. What about you, Tar? I'm curious about this. How much time do you spend crafting an opening statement? By the way, Joe, do you read your opening statement to your wife?
No, I do everything alone. I just pace it out wherever I am. My driveway, the hallway in my office, outside the courtroom.
I love Joe Krowski. Tar, how about you? How long do you work on this?
Oh, a lot. A full day for sure, if not more. I mean, I'm adding to it, as the trial goes on, making little notes about things I don't want to forget that I want to include in my closing. I'm a monster. I will lock myself in my office or in my house and just kick everybody out and just sit there and focus on doing my what I'm going to say, because it really is. I mean, Joe's exactly right. Your opening statement, you're just kind of bullet pointing out what you believe the evidence is going to show. This person's going to say this. This person's going to say this. It's like it's cheesy, but they say it's a roadmap. You don't want to say that in front of a jury, but it really is. You're giving them kind of a roadmap for what this is going to look like. And then your closing argument is the big bang. Those are your best zingers and lines. And that's where you wrap the bow around everything. And you're explaining the evidence that came in and saying, they haven't proved their case here, or they have, whatever. And so there's a lot of pressure on that, and juries listen to those closing arguments really carefully, especially the ones who perhaps weren't paying attention during the trial. So highlighting, what's good for your side and what came in and what didn't and what was bad for the other side is really critical, and making sure you put on a good case.
By the way, I'm going to make an appeal right now.
That $2,000 an hour, I didn't come up with that figure. Someone earlier in the group below had put that up there. So
Yeah, I saw that.
I don't know if
bet
that's
you.
accurate or not. I should clarify that.
I bet you it is accurate. I have a friend. I won't mention his name. He's a big time DC lobbyist, and his billable hour I think is 2,800. And he doesn't even practice law, Joe. He just bullshits for a living down in DC. That's what he does. Yeah, I'm not 66. Alec Baldwin is 66. And I was going to say something. I have these senior moments now. Oh, I was going to make an appeal to all you defense attorneys out there. Don't know if you heard, I'm an author, former broadcast news guy. The whole thing about being a good writer in TV news is the economy of words. So for $3,000 an hour, I will take your opening statement and your closing arguments, and I will make them the best they can possibly be. So I'm available at $3,000 an hour for any attorneys in America that want to improve their opening statements and closing arguments. Tara, final quick thing here. One thing that I could not help but notice during Alex Spiro's opening, he kept getting interrupted by the prosecutor. There was like 3 sidebars and an objection. What the hell was going on? He looked like perturbed, but almost like, oh my God, what is going on in this state? But what was happening there?
Well, a couple of things. We obviously weren't up there for the sidebars, but likely he was getting in the realm of being too argumentative or being argumentative in his opening statement. That's going to draw an objection. Especially, and one of the objections there, I caught something on the mic, but it seemed like there had been a discussion, a pretrial discussion about what they could use. I think it was one of the videos or video clips that he was using. It was just one little comment there, but he was getting interrupted with objections because he was diving into and getting into what, really is a closing argument here. Generally, there's some latitude given by attorneys in opening statements. It's not great form to object, but if it's going to be prejudicial to your case, you have to. And I'm sure he was perturbed. It's not great. I mean, especially when you're on a roll, you feel like you're on a roll, you're putting a narrative out there, and there's an objection, and now you got to pause and get back to the judge and have that discussion, come back again. I mean, all that momentum is gone. You're really, trying to restart it.
Yeah. By the way, Genome says I would help Lally. I would 1,000. You know what? I think I'm going to start this business. I could help defense attorneys all around and prosecutors all around this country. I was on TV, for God's sakes, for a quarter century. I can help these people. I know about the economy of words. Anyway, Canine Catherine out in Maui, so rude. Speaking about the prosecutor, she did that in the Hannah Gutierrez retrial too. So there you go. Richard Gabriel, by the way, we were going to have another powerhouse guest. He's coming tomorrow, I think. He is Joshua Kastenberg. He is at the University of New Mexico School of Law. He did not feel well tonight, so we'll get him on the show, as well as Sam Hoffman, who, as I mentioned, is a director on Hollywood films, to give us some perspective from that area. But since 1985, Richard Gabriel, as I said, he's been a leader in the field of jury research. He has worked with Aaron Hernandez, Casey Anthony, O.J. Simpson, Phil Spector. The list goes on. The Hollywood Madam, Heidi Fleiss. So shout out to Richard for being with us. Tara Malik is a current Idaho licensed attorney. As I said, she's been with us for all the Lori Vallow Daybell stuff. And Brian Koberger. That trial, by the way, set for the summer of 2025. But Tara, this trial here, Alec Baldwin in New Mexico, do you think this ends with a not guilty verdict? Is it just, is the prosecution biting off more than they can chew?
I usually kind of hedge on these, but I think it's going to be a not guilty in this case.
There you go. Tara Malik letting us know what she thinks. Joe Krowski, he is the Brockton bomber, regarded as one of the preeminent trial attorneys in Massachusetts. He's aggressive. He's persuasive. He's handsome. I like his hairstyle, whatever his wife says. Joe Krowski, is Alec Baldwin going to walk free, or is he going to have to do his reality show from behind bars?
Oh, God, I hope so. Irrespective of what people feel about Alec Baldwin, we can't criminalize every negligent act, and it's arguably not even negligent. I think the jury's going to see it. I think it's going to be a not guilty, and I think, as a matter of fact, in law, it should be.
There you go. terse answers. Appreciate this panel. Another amazing panel. Love you, America. Love you, Idaho. Love you, Brockton, Mass, even Canton, Mass. And STS in Chicago next week. There you go. We're going to be in Chicago. If you didn't see this, next Thursday night, July 18th. July 18th, Thursday night, 7:30 p.m. at the Temple Shalom. Shalom. Carm will be there. I will be there. The COE will be there. And our kids will be there. What could possibly go wrong? Love you, Chicago. See you tomorrow, everybody.